Hello and welcome to the Get French Football News Show on July 1st, 2018. I'm Eric Devin and our host this evening is Adam White. We'll be joined by Jeremy Smith as well to review France's 4-3 win over Argentina. Adam, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Hello and welcome to the Get French Football News Show, a special World Cup edition. I'm Adam White, as Eric mentioned, and this evening, Eric and Jeremy join me once again. Just a quick reminder before we talk all things Les Bleus and their last 16 win over Argentina that you can follow us on Twitter at GFFN and to find all the latest news, opinion, podcasts and feature articles on French football as a whole. Check out getfootballnewsfrance.com. So, France are finally here, chaps. Let's dive in. Jez, we'll start with you. Your reaction to France finally turning up at the World Cup in Russia. A brilliant game and a superb performance, no?
Yeah, fabulous performance. I'm torn about this sort of finally turning up. I guess you can look at it either way. And, I don't know if it was kidology, but everything that Deschamps and the players were saying beforehand turned out to be true, whether they were sort of trying to convince themselves when they were playing badly in their first three matches that they were sort of pacing themselves, they were purposely doing the bare minimum to preserve energy and everything. I'm not sure if that was entirely the case, but it's certainly sort of been borne out and vindicated by the way they played yesterday. I think, to be fair, Argentina were sort of a perfect matchup, with a very slow defence and willingness to attack and leave spaces. But you can't fault the way that France exploited it. And obviously, it was a bit shocking the number of people who seems not to have heard of Mbappe before the match, but certainly he's a worldwide household name now.
Absolutely, his performance was, I think, not necessarily out of the blue. I think, given his performances for Monaco last season, and he's threatened to this kind of thing for PSG, and sort of come close a few times, Eric, this season. Mbappe, the difference for you against Argentina?
Yeah, I think clearly. I think that the tactics obviously had their hand. I think that entire midfield, Matuidi, Pogba, and Kante all had strong matches as well. But I think this is the Mbappe that we thought we'd see down the back end of 2016-17, as you mentioned, when Monaco progressed so far in the Champions League, won Liga. Again, I think that there were certainly some growing pains this past season at PSG. But again, he was being played really out of position, I think, or at least in a position that was new to him at PSG. And I think that also not having the same freedom of the pitch that he had with Monaco. Obviously he had to cede position in terms of his importance on the pitch to the likes of Neymar, Edinson Cavani. But I think that Didier Deschamps, in setting the team out this way, and his teammates as well, recognized how incandescent, how brilliant he can be if he's given that amount of freedom. We saw it, even though I think one would argue when Mbappe had come through that he wasn't necessarily the superstar of that team. We would look at a player like Radamel Falcao, Thomas Lemar, maybe even Joao Moutinho based on reputation. But those players saw just how much of a difference Mbappe could be in turning a match on its head in a matter of seconds. And I think that they're willing to subsume some of their own egos in order to allow him to play with that sort of freedom. And I think that Deschamps tactically and his teammates as well, in terms of their responsibility, saw what a difference that Mbappe could make, from their matches early stages, and allow themselves to have that be the case going forward. And I think so. Credit to Deschamps for striking that balance, even though it may have seemed slightly negative at the outset to play Matuidi in that role, but also for the teammates for following that role with such dedication to allow him to succeed in that way.
I think backing up what Eric said, it was interesting that I can't remember if it was Jonathan Liu's article. He wrote a really glowing article about Mbappe in The Independent yesterday, but someone anyway said that Mbappe's role for PSG is basically to serve Cavani and Neymar, rightly or wrongly. And certainly, I think a lot of the season he seems quite starstruck by Neymar. Whereas yesterday, I think they showed on French TV sort of hidden microphone, well, not hidden, but a microphone caught Deschamps sort of shouting at Pogba, pull, every time you get the ball, give it to Kylian. So you know, he certainly thrived being the main man this time around.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that he certainly was the main man. It was an interesting, because I rewatched the game this morning, and I sort of felt like that Mbappe's performance was, although brilliant, I felt like, and obviously he affected the game far more than anybody else. He did so in spurts, if you like. You think about the run for the penalty, which was unreal. The amount of the sheer change of pace and direction that he has is insane. And what I thought was a superb finish, which didn't make too many sort of headlines, I guess. The first goal where he nutmegs the defender, I think, and then sort of fires it under the goalkeeper. Maybe some questions over the Armani there, and obviously rounding off the team move. Any highlights for you, Eric? And how high is Mbappe's ceiling, do you think, based on the performance yesterday?
I think, again, there's going to be some questions, and we'll get to this, as to how if Matuidi is unavailable. Deschamps has indicated he will appeal Matuidi's card, but how Deschamps balances the team on Friday will certainly have a lot to how to affect this. But I think that, you know, Uruguay are very organized, but again, you know, they don't have the same sort of marauding fullbacks or very attack-minded defenders who are willing to step up to play that way. They're very organized, but again, speed is somewhat of an issue for Uruguay. And I think that, you know, we could potentially, depending on how Deschamps sets things out, see perhaps not a repeat of this performance, but certainly Mbappe remaining a very dangerous threat. And maybe that allows, on the subsequent occasion, more freedom space for Giroud, more space for Griezmann, more space for Pogba. I don't think we have to necessarily look at Mbappe's ability to affect a match being necessarily down to the output of goals. I think that he could potentially affect this Uruguay match very positively without necessarily scoring.
Yeah, I would absolutely have to agree. I think some of his best performances for PSG this season have been when he hasn't scored. I think the Coupe de Ligue final was one of his sort of landmark performances, and I don't think he scored in that game. So he's definitely capable of doing that. And I think something you touched on really interesting there was sort of the space that he's allowed, and we've mentioned also the freedom that he's been allowed, and we've sort of touched the formation, which is something I really wanted to sort of zero in on a little bit, because it was a little bit unusual in terms of setup, given that it was nominally a 4-4-2, but Mbappe was given sort of so much more freedom and a license to bomb forward on that right hand side compared to Matuidi, and those sort of three midfielders of Pogba, Kante, and Matuidi almost shuffle across, and it would become a 4-3-3. And occasionally Griezmann even dropped in on that right hand side in the first half. I was wondering, Jez, do you think this is a formation that, it feels like, given the performance over, in the win over Argentina, that it will be the go-to formation for the tournament? But is there an opportunity for it to be exposed, given that Mbappe is so far forward on that right-hand side that there's sort of space, and it may be the fullback there is going to be a little bit exposed, and maybe Pogba's discipline comes into play, who's on the sort of the right-hand side of those three? Is it a formation that against a better team could be exposed?
I think Deschamps is likely to stick with the same formation, but I'm less worried about the exposure. It's more France's kind of attacking threat. I think Uruguay are a hell of a lot more canny team than Argentina. They've got better defenders, quicker defenders, defenders in a hell of a lot more form and confidence. So I certainly don't think Mbappe will be allowed the same kind of freedom. I'm hoping he and the rest of the team get a little bit more protection than the referee gave them yesterday. I mean, how Mascherano wasn't sent off, how Mercado didn't even get a yellow card is beyond me. And I think if the same happens on Friday, I think France may struggle. He's going to have to shuffle things a little bit, because Tolisso, as sort of versatile as he is, I don't think is a similar kind of player to Matuidi, in that I don't think he's going to sort of be, bombing up and down. I don't think he quite has the same. I was going to say defensive stability. I'm not sure that's a good description of Matuidi, but I think
dynamism, sort of.
Yeah, he's got, I think, a little bit more discipline to do that. So I mean, if it is Tolisso to come in, I don't know if he will replace Matuidi immediately, or Pogba will swap and play on his preferred left position, even though he's been playing well on the right. So I think there are question marks there. And I think maybe Hernandez, I mean, I thought in the first half, certainly, Hernandez didn't attack as much as he has been in all his other France performances so far. So, and there was the a moment that's been talked about a bit later in the match when France were 2 up, and he went forward, and Griezmann sort of gave him a telling off and sort of said, "Remember, Atletico, you don't go forwards when we've got a 2-goal cushion." So I mean, Hernandez has got the discipline, I think, to stay back if needed, and it's possible that he may just be asked not to bomb forward quite as much as he has done in other matches. A lot, I guess, also turns on whether Cavani's going to be fit or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first, just a very quick point on that Cavani situation. I'd be very disappointed if he did miss the game. I think he'd be a great occasion to see Cavani play against France. And given his sort of up and down PSG career so far, it'd be great to see him, not from a completely neutral point of view, to see him affect that game against the French. But it does look pretty touch and go for him. Eric, I just wanted to sort of touch on some of those points that Jez raised there in terms of the setup. And the possible, admission of Matuidi, given that, Tolisso will probably come in, but there's a chance that he could play, given that the yellow card is going to be, tried at least to be turned over by the French team. What would you do? Would you bring Tolisso in? Would you look at Nzonzi? How would you try and cover the lack of dynamism from difference between Matuidi and Tolisso?
As much as I love Tolisso, and I know that he can add a lot going forward, particularly from set pieces, he's a very good aerial threat as well. I go with Nzonzi. I think that Kanté is as diligent of a sentinel as he can be, is a player who can affect play going forward. He's very good at linking play with short passes. And Nzonzi has a fair bit of dynamism to him too. I mean, I don't think we're going to see him, go off on a sort of a rumbling Pogba-style run, but he certainly is not a bad player with the ball at his feet. Range of passing is a little bit of a question for me for Nzonzi, but I think that he also is going to offer, a real level of physicality there that's going to give that Uruguay midfield quite a bit more to think about, and perhaps even can drop between the center backs and allow Hernandez and Pavard to get forward a little bit more than we've seen, if the game dictates that be necessary. So I think Nzonzi simply gives you a little bit more flexibility. I mean, really, if we look at it, Matuidi, he played very well, but I don't think that his attacking contributions in the match yesterday were anything to write home about. And in that regard, I think making the swap of, it would be functionally be him for Kanté, again swapping sides, but with Pogba, that is. But I don't think that France would necessarily lose anything, given how fantastically that last phase of attacking play could be. And even it could give Paul Pogba more license to get forward and play in an even freer role than perhaps he had. Again, he was fantastic on yesterday, but he still had a fair amount of defensive work to do. But I think that if you've got Kanté in a more advanced role than being in front of that back four, then I think that Pogba could necessarily be freed as well. And you might even offer a bit more dynamism, particularly to link play into the flat with those fullbacks if they do get forward. So I would personally go with Nzonzi and push Kanté further forward. And whether you want to keep Pogba on the right, play Kanté on the left, or switch them, I think that remains to be seen. The point of Pogba playing well on the right is true, but I think Kanté's perhaps a more natural fit on the right.
Yeah, I'd have to agree that Kanté would make a lot more sense on the right. I think I have to echo a lot of what you said there. I think that makes a lot of sense, bringing Nzonzi in, given that even when they sort of drop back into defensive shape, and Mbappé was still sort of nominally on the right-hand side, and as I said, Griezmann kind of filled in there too, it makes sense for Kanté to sort of switch over to that side because you cover that space. And I also agree in the respect that Kanté has such dynamism and covers so much ground. And as we saw when he was at Leicester alongside Danny Drinkwater, there was the famous Ranieri quote where he said, he might cross the ball in, header it in himself. He wouldn't be surprised to see that. And I think when he plays for Chelsea and he plays in this French team as a sentinel, I think you lose a lot of that. And bringing Nzonzi in, who would be, as you said, has a lot of physicality, a bit of dynamism as well to combat the sort of very physical Uruguay team, that kind of makes sense. And also, as you said, you get Pogba on his left-hand side. It might sort of free him up a little bit, even though he was very, very good yesterday, Jez, I thought. Best performance from Pogba in a French shirt for quite some time, do you think?
I think he's been one of the better players this World Cup. And again, I mean, I think probably you saw the usual Pogba, the best and worst of it, but we just saw a lot more of the best, which is when he keeps things simple. And by simple, I mean, probably the greatest Pogba moment was that sort of pitch long pass from which Mbappe won the free kick, from which Pogba blasted over. But I mean, it's simple in the sense that it was just one straight move. It's not simple in that it's obviously very difficult to do. But I think that's when Pogba's at his best. Just 1-2 touches, whether it's long balls, short balls, whatever it is. There was still a couple of moments where he held on the ball a bit too long, tried to do a little twirl or nutmeg someone or whatever, and then ended up losing the ball. So there's still that frustration, but certainly overall, in this match, and I'd say the whole of this World Cup so far, for the most part, he has been keeping it relatively simple, and therefore, really playing well. And I hope he keeps doing that. I think a few people, including me, a little bit scoffed before the World Cup when he said, I was the young player of the last World Cup, and this time I want to be the player of the World Cup. I'm not sure he's there yet, but he's certainly going the way about it, and not even just on the pitch, but he's won a hell of a lot of friends with his multilingual press conferences and post-match interviews as well. So yeah, really impressed with everything he's done so far, including yesterday.
Yeah, I have to agree. I
was going to agree on Nzonzi. I think I said it last time I was on, actually, that it's not a bad call, and both because you've got that the extra dynamism of Conte, and also in terms of Nzonzi, sounds silly, I'm not interested in dynamism from him. I'm happy for him to sit if it means that the front three can get a little bit more support from Kante and Pogba if that's needed to get past Uruguay's defence. But I'm not sure that Deschamps will go with that, because I thought, although Tolisso wasn't superb in the first match, I think unfairly, but Nzonzi got a lot of stick for his Denmark performance, and I just think the fact that it was Tolisso who came on just after Matuidi got the second booking, well, first booking yesterday, but second altogether, possibly gives an indication that that's the way Deschamps going to go.
Yeah, it certainly feels that way, doesn't it? I have to agree with you. I don't understand the criticism from the Denmark game of Nzonzi. I thought him and Kante were, it was an absolutely dire game, were both pretty solid and did their jobs perfectly well. One thing I want to touch on, I want to move on to Griezmann and Giroud and their partnership and how they got on yesterday. But can we have a quick appreciation of Benjamin Pavard's goal, Eric? The technique was unbelievable, wasn't it, on that strike? And out of nowhere, his first French goal, and not something having watched him a lot at Lille, not something I expected from him at all.
No. I mean, just the way it did set up for him perfectly. There's a small element of luck, but just to hit that outside of the boot shot and have it twist in just such a way, yeah. I mean, goal of the tournament. It's certainly a contender. I don't think that we necessarily need to be ranking and rating every single goal, but it was a thing of beauty, and on a and certainly you could argue there's a little bit of luck to that, but then again, hitting a shot from distance. We saw Argentina benefit from the same with Di Maria's goal, so I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. I don't think it unfairly tilted the balance of play towards France, and well done to the young lad. And I think that we could potentially be looking at someone as he develops a bit more attacking now as being, France's right back for the next 10 years. Being, I think, 22 at this point. Yeah, so very well done for him, and Hernandez as well. The way that both of them have played, given their lack of experience prior to the tournament, is really, really impressive. And to have the vision to execute such a shot, I think, is also says a lot about where his confidence is. I think that shouldn't be diminished either.
Indeed. I would. Sorry, go on, Jessica.
No,
yeah, it was great.
I was going to say that I think that the technique was brilliant to sort of bend his body to make sure he still sort of kept over the ball. But also, for me, what possibly just edges it in terms of goal of the tournament is the cross for Hernandez was good, but the pass by Umtiti to Hernandez as well. So it wasn't just a shot out of nowhere. I thought it was quite a nice build-up as well.
Yeah, agreed. I would just because it was so satisfying in that slow motion where he sort of cuts under and across the ball and it sort of upspin almost into the top corner. It was a great finish. And although I think that maybe an underrated competitor for that, it's certainly best French goal of the tournament at least. There's not many contenders there, but the team goal at the end Eric, was quite something as well. I saw some people comparing it to that Brazil goal from 1970, which is a little bit much for me, but showing that there's some sort of attacking cohesion in this French team now, and perhaps now they found a slightly better formula, at least, that they can sort of string some decent moves together and score more goals in that fashion, because it's not necessarily something they've done well for.
Adam?
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just asking about the team goal, Mbappe's the fourth goal for France. So
right,
it was quite something as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really emblematic of the way that this team approached this match overall yesterday. I think that what we're seeing is still, Jeremy, as you rightly mentioned, there's still a level of erraticness and a lack of overall consistency from some of these players. Pogba in particular, maybe Hernandez in some of his positioning. But I think that more than anything, what we're seeing with this France team is there's a clear and cohesive goal, and we're seeing a lack of selfishness on these players that I don't really think we've seen before. France has always been lauded as this team of individuals who perhaps don't fit together quite in the way you'd want. But I think that seeing the way that this tournament is opening up with favorites playing poorly, dropping out, I think that France might be realizing that, with that sort of single-mindedness, that this tournament is theirs to win if they work together in a consistent and cohesive way to support each other and to work within the lines of a tactical system that may seem unorthodox, but is proving to be incredibly effective at bringing the best out of the somewhat disparate pieces that make up this team.
I think that I've generally been a defender of Deschamps. I think he gets a hell of a lot too much stick. But the nature of this team, the real talents are I think erratic is a good word, extremely talented, but for the most part still very young, still very raw forward players. I can understand why Deschamps has sort of, I guess, said to himself, they are erratic, they're not always on form at the same time, so there's been very little consistency in terms of the front 5 or 6 picked from squad to squad. I'm going to concentrate on making sure that we're as much as possible defensively solid. And I think it's taken a while, but certainly it feels, I know they conceded 3 goals yesterday, but I think it's fair to say 2 of them were relatively freakish goals. It feels like there's more defensive stability. And once you've got that foundation, then the front 3 or 5 or however many it's going to be can get to work. The great thing about the 4th goal yesterday is the thing that a lot of people are saying, France aren't a sort of Spain-like sort of ponderous, lots of slow passing kind of team, and it has felt in the group stages that they were doing a little bit too much of that. The 4th goal really showed what they're best at, and if you're playing that kind of quick one-touch football, there is going to be some wastage, there are going to be some frustrating losses of possession, but when it clicks, and there's no reason why it shouldn't more often than not, it's going to be great to see. But I think you can only have the freedom to do that when you know that you're sort of being covered behind you.
Absolutely. And in terms of clicking, I just want to sort of touch on that a little bit. And consistency you mentioned there, I think there is a degree of consistency sort of creeping into the striking department, at least with France, in that it seems that Giroud and Griezmann, rightly in my opinion, are the front 2. Sort of, again, this is a bit of a lopsided formation, so front 2 might not be the right, necessarily the right phrasing, but I'm not sure that given the performance of the team as a whole, I felt that Griezmann and Giroud perhaps were lagging a little bit behind in terms of level yesterday. Eric, what do you think? As in, I felt the midfield on form, defence on form. Lloris, very unfortunate for the first goal, but didn't make any mistakes. But I'm not sure Giroud in particular impacted the game as Deschamps would hope, despite obviously a very good win.
I think I have to reflect on what I said about Mbappe earlier, that yes, they're strikers, yes, they're forwards, but I think those two in concert with Mbappe have a relationship based on each of their individual talents that's really fomenting in a very attractive way. And they know that necessarily they don't have to be at the end of every move. And I think that that's something that, Giroud, I think we can agree, has been a very tireless player, and very good at linking play, going back to his time with Montpellier. But I think that Griezmann in particular, I think we're seeing a newer side of him where he's more willing to be a creative link and work harder off the ball as well. And I think that realization on the part of Griezmann can be looked at as a role model, might make too strong, but something to look to as a player who is approaching his late 20s and hasn't really yet shown for France in the way that I think he's been tipped to by some. And I think that again, that sense of selfishness is that we've seen in midfield. Again, it's not perfect for these players because they are being forced slightly to adapt their style of play due to the rise and prominence of Mbappe within the team. But it doesn't mean they're not working hard and working effectively to create opportunities, even if they themselves are not the ones who are the beneficiaries of them.
I'd back that up. I mean, I had people agreeing and entirely disagreeing with me on my timeline last night. But when I saw that L'Équipe gave Giroud 5 out of 10, I personally thought that was really harsh. And actually, I saw today that he won 1 aerial challenge out of 9, which I was shocked at because I know I'm a big fan of his, but it really felt like he was winning everything in the air yesterday. So I'd have to watch that again. But I feel like he occupies, as Eric said, he occupies the defenders. He does it physically, but while Otamendi is sort of tussling with him, and the ball can break to Mbappe for him to score his first goal yesterday, that kind of thing. And on top of that, the pressing that he does, people make fun of his running and the fact that he's slow and things like that. He ran more than Mbappe and Griezmann yesterday. So I just think his hard work for the team and that the control that he gives, talking earlier about how erratic some of them are. That's, I think, the big difference. I know they're completely different profiles of players, but that was the difference between Giroud and, say, Dembele. You've got Griezmann, Mbappe, and Dembele as 3 sort of electrons buzzing everywhere. But then one minute they're all stepping on each other's toes, the next minute they're nowhere near each other, and the next minute they're sort of selfishly dribbling for themselves and not even looking to pass. When Giroud's there, he's down the middle, where he's going to be, what he's going to do, and the other 2 can feed off them. And as Eric said, all 3 of them are capable of sort of, even if they're not necessarily doing anything with the ball, they're occupying defenders and leaving more space for the other 2 to do something. So I've got no complaints whatsoever with Giroud. He had another lovely assist yesterday. And then with Griezmann, it has been a frustrating World Cup so far just because we know that he can do so much more. But I did feel, even against Denmark, I felt that he seemed a little bit more full of running than the first 2 matches. And yesterday again, just although really unlucky with the free kick that came off the bar, he put away the penalty. Still not at his best, still not sort of late stages of the Euros, but I do feel like he's kind of on an upward trajectory. My only concern there is that considering they work so well together, the number of passes exchanged between Giroud and Griezmann this World Cup is horrifically low. Which I'm hoping is just some strange anomaly which will rectify itself. My frustration there is that it's always Giroud who gets the blame. Whoever's making the pass, if it doesn't complete, it's always Giroud's fault, never Griezmann's. But I think that's sort of Giroud's cross to bear, and I think he's probably pretty much used to it now.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really interesting point because he does seem to be a little bit of a scapegoat sometimes, even though a lot of the things that perhaps he's, things he's blamed for aren't necessarily entirely his fault. And I think that's a really interesting point. Hopefully that won't last for too much longer because I agree that 5 out of 10 from L'Équipe surprised me, even though he wasn't particularly threatening. I felt he still performed his role pretty well, as you said, got a nice assist and was generally sort of worked really well for the team. As always, he was Giroud, he just didn't score, which isn't necessarily too surprising. All right, he's got a really good international record. He's got 31 maybe in 70 something games, which isn't bad at all. But his main function for most of the teams he's played for has been to help the team and be a focal point and hold up play and play others in. And he certainly did that really well yesterday. So I have to agree wholeheartedly there on both those points. Hopefully he won't be a scapegoat for much longer. But as you said, that's probably is his cross to bear. And he's already 30. Don't really see that going anywhere soon. So just to finish off, chaps, Uruguay, looking ahead towards the Uruguay game, and perhaps based on this performance and based on the tournament as a whole, we've seen Spain go out today, Portugal and Argentina obviously yesterday, Italy and Holland didn't qualify. It's a pretty open tournament. So two questions to you both. Where do you think this Uruguay game is going to be won and lost? And where do France get to now? Are they favourites for this tournament, Eric?
I'm not ready to anoint them favorites, but I think this match will be won and lost, at how well Uruguay can deal with Mbappe. They're aware of what he wants to do, and again, that Uruguayan back four is quicker than Argentina is, but it's still not pacey. It relies on its organization. So if Mbappe can keep his head up and not get frustrated, I think France look good for a win here. 1-0, 2-1, not a high-scoring match. I don't think that Uruguay, particularly if Cavani doesn't play, are going to offer that much in attack. But favorites, I think that they're certainly moving up. We're seeing a team that's improving, and we're also seeing some of those other pre-tournament favorites drop out. I don't think Croatia were particularly convincing in the match that just finished either. They were a team that really impressed in the group stages. I think have fallen off a little bit themselves. So I think it remains to be seen, but I certainly think France are in a better position now than they were, before the tournament in terms of that hierarchy, if not only by dint of the fact that some of those other so-called favorites have been eliminated.
For me, just everyone knows I'm a born pessimist, particularly when it comes to France. I was sure that Argentina were going to win. It was typical that they scraped through. So obviously now they're going to sort of bounce on from that and beat France. So I'm certainly not the best person to listen to for France predictions, but I think this will be a hell of a lot more difficult than the Argentina match, which wound up being a lot easier than the score suggested. I think Uruguay, well, like I said earlier, I think they're more canny. I think they're better defensively. I think they'll just combat France's threats better. But I do still think France do have the options. If I think they'll probably start with Giroud, who can sort of match Uruguay's physicality, but if and when it's needed, I still think players like Dembele or Fekir, Dembele with his pace, Fekir with his nous, can also, find ways to break through the Uruguayan line, which hasn't yet been breached this World Cup, which is, shows how good they are at the back. So I agree, it's certainly not going to be a high scoring match, but and it could go either way, and I don't really want to call it. But if France get through it, in terms of favourites, I mean, to me there were three teams that were better than France going into the tournament, and two of them are out, so they're certainly up there. It's just slightly unfortunate that the other one, Brazil, they're due to meet in the semi-final. But if it came to that, I do think they have the beating of Brazil. I think they've got a bit of an Indian sign over them. Brazil haven't got the best record against them in recent years, certainly in the World Cup. And I'm still not sure that Brazil are that strong a team. To me, Neymar may well improve as he goes through the tournament, but to me, Coutinho's carrying that team at the moment, and they haven't, really faced anyone half decent yet, I don't think either. So, weirdly, I think I'd feel more confident about France playing Brazil than I do about them playing Uruguay. But yeah, one step at a time.
For sure, I think it's definitely a much trickier game. I think Argentina were actually, although pretty aggressive yesterday, lacking in the quality that you would expect from a usual Argentinian side at a World Cup, and were actually relatively compliant. I felt in the first half, especially, there was a lot of space between their midfield and defence, which France exploited at times relatively well. And although you look at it and say France-Argentina 4-3, it must have been an epic battle and then momentous sort of World Cup knockout game, and it was to some extent. But I felt that France, although brilliant, easily their best game of the tournament, and they looked fantastic, Argentina were a little bit compliant. And on Uruguay, Jess, I think that your Griezmann tweet kind of sums it up, where he says on Uruguay, You know, they'll time waste, they'll go down easily, they'll pressure the ref. It's their game. That's what we do at Atletico. It's going to be a really annoying match, and I think that probably just about sums it up. My thanks to Eric and Jeremy Smith. That's about all we've got time for this evening. Remember, check out GFFN on Twitter and the website getfootballnewsfrance.com. So thank you for listening. Have a nice evening and enjoy the rest of the World Cup. Allez les Bleus.